I invite you now just to take a moment to feel your body in your chair, to take some deep breaths, feel what that is like, to maybe take a quick note of what thoughts are passing through your mind. To express in your own mind whatever gratitude you feel for the opportunity to be in this place at this time with this community. To express any apprehensions or concerns that may be on your mind, express those in your mind. And feel free to know that you are individually and we are together collectively surrounded, filled with divine love. Within us, around us, between us. So our topic today and next week is the neighborhood where Vince and I live, now called the York Center Community. And we're so glad to have two veterans from the community. Doris, I've known since we moved in 8 years ago, next month, to the community. And Joyce, this is my first time to meet you, I think. So that's all good. It's great. Let's just get going with the film. You'll learn the word Rochdale in the film. Rochdale is a circle in our community. It's the name of one of the streets in our community. More importantly, it's the name of a town in England where universal cooperative principles were first devised in 1844. And those principles, I have that on another slide. If you would like to know what the 7 principles of cooperative living and work are, I've got that on another slide. But let me know at the end of watching this film. We'll watch about 30 minutes today and have some conversation about it. Let me know if you would like to know what those 7 principles are. They're very simply enunciated there. Also, to know the first half of the film, first 30 minutes, really sets up in terms of history and historical context why this community is significant. Both historically, going back to Rochdale in England, but also in terms of the post-war American context of racial and religious bigotry, racial segregation in the suburbs, and McCarthyism, the Red Scare, and all that that meant. And here was a community that was planted in DuPage County, kind of bringing all of that into question and some of the tension that existed. So I'm getting ahead of myself a little bit. Just some notes real quick. Yes, that's Doris Dornberger in the film.
Yeah.
And if you're not able to be here next week, or you just can't wait to know how this story turns out, you can see the film yourself. It's on YouTube, and the link is in the Messenger and the Spiritual Enrichment update. Wanted to mention that Joyce is a member of the First Church of the Brethren in Chicago on the west side of Garfield Park. And so that congregation is still there. The York Center Church of the Brethren is really just immediately east of our community, across Westmore and Myers Road, and is still there. Bethany Seminary was right around the corner from our community, but some years ago it moved to Richmond, Indiana. And lastly, would you like to look real quickly at the 7 principles of the cooperative movement? Okay. I thought you might find that helpful.
But you said these are updated ones, not the original.
Right, because in the film it was showing 5.
I need to you're gonna have to get,
The original 7 principles have been amended.
Well, different groups did different things, and I don't know if the original ones that were created by the co-op are the ones that we're using when we lived there. So I moved there in '87, you moved there in 75. And lived there until, but my husband went to Bethany Seminary, so we were involved since '68.
so there are still co-ops around. There's another one in Lombard at the church I used to serve, First Church of Lombard. At the nursery, the preschool nursery is a co-op. There are food co-ops. I belong to a food co-op in Cambridge, Massachusetts. I was a student there.
Well, on the south side, there's quite a few
Right.
co-ops.
Co-op high rises. Housing.
High-rises.
Yeah.
There's
So-
one on the north side too.
So this rewriting, or maybe it's not so much a rewriting, but it's certainly a contemporary version of the Rochdale Principles, comes from Cloyne, which is one of the student housing co-ops at the University of California, Berkeley. So here are the 7 as it's on their website. Voluntary and open membership, just like in the film. Democratic member control, that was covered, basically one person, one vote. The third principle, I was reading this last night, member economic participation. Correct me, Joyce and Doris, but I understand that this means everybody's got skin in the game.
We used to have a labor bank.
Right.
What? Have a what? A labor bank.
Labor
So-
bank.
So it was real important. It was real important.
And you had to contribute cash or labor or both, right?
No,
No?
well, labor was preferred, but, if you chose not to do that, then you paid cash.
And if you had extra hours, you could give them to somebody else. So we often did that.
Oh,
And what was the goal of that?
Well, we had common land well, the whole thing was common land,
Right.
but there was a park and
And Shelterville,
and Shelterville.
and there was mowing to be done.
And so we divided up that labor. Landscaping, but then we added to a board membership at a later point.
Which was heavy duty hours. There was a planning commission. There were lots of different committees. The labor bank, I think, was a real important piece of what made it work, because again, it helped you to have skin in the game. And it was I was labor bank there when I started. It was $4 an hour, which, in the late '80s, that wasn't much, but it really did help people to do things. And there were lots of jobs to be done. And you were, again, as I say in there, you were in each other's homes. You had common things that you were working on in different committees. There was a credit union early on. And again, you worked together. Bartering was an important piece. I bartered a new deck by doing laundry and mowing laundry for 2 years.
But initially, it was part of the building of homes.
Right.
So it really was very neutral.
so to answer Eleanor's question, the labor or the cash for labor was to run the community. Not just the physical part, right? But also the administrative part. So board membership and service?
That came later.
Okay.
Came at the tail end.
Wow,
of
so
it.
okay, initially, oh my gosh, because the hours those folks put in. Oh.
And also the community had its own water system, right?
Mhm.
So the community had to run that and the parks.
Yeah.
There was a park anyway.
Yeah,
No, there wasn't. I thought they.
well, no, there was a part, well, but there was also,
Shelterville.
right, there were shelter belts and there was a pond that.
Was it waiting list? Cause the ones in Chicago, they have waiting lists. Cause I tried to get in a couple of them in Chicago, and they have a waiting list. Then there was one, a community where all men Do you have it like that? And then they had one all women, and then they have, does co-op mean integrated men and women?
We had a waiting list, and so we lived on Rochdale Circle when we moved in. And so, you got the date of your application for your list. And so when the house came up next to yours, our family had enlarged and my mother was gonna come out and live with us, so we needed a larger home. So we were at the top of the list of people who were interested in buying Betsy's house.
Let me just go through the rest of these principles, then we can bring our people on Zoom into the, so we can see them too. Autonomy and independence, which I believe means that the co-op was to be its own entity. Every co-op, this is not just the York Center co-op, this is all co-ops. Education, training, and information. So the community, each co-op pledges itself to a process of continuing ongoing education. Cooperation among co-ops. So co-ops, even though each one is independent, co-ops are expected to help each other. I don't know how that might have taken shape at the York Center Co-op, but
Early on, it was significant.
yeah, okay.
By the time I was there, it was.
And the last one, concern for community, which I think means not just the immediate community, but perhaps the broader community as well. Okay, so these are the 7 kind of universal principles of co-ops. So conversation with Joyce and Doris, what would you like to know?
I'd like to know how many people are in the co-op.
There's 79 family units.
In fact, to your question, I think it was always a family unit. That was always.
And just to bring the story up to date, the co-op as such does not exist anymore. We'll talk about that more next week or today if you'd like. So we speak of the co-op in past tense, not present tense. So
How is the common property maintained in the water system?
So Doris and Joyce can speak to what happened to the common property.
Well, let's go to the water system first. That's easier. So it was 1996 that we did it over to DuPage County. Our water system was, it required lots of work. It required daily checking. We had EPA things, right? We had that. And
You can speak up.
oh, I'm sorry.
Yeah,
We
if you
had-
sort of turn aside, we can't hear you.
Okay, thank you for that cue. So the EPA required things. It was lots and lots of work. You may know more about the specifics of how it happened. It seems that that was a turning point that was became a disaster as far as people were using that as a reason that we needed to be done.
I mean, the water system was always a controversy, so I
Was it?
don't think this is a good place for us to go.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. No, I didn't know it always. I know it became one, but so,
Always was.
okay. And the one thing, well, it was not, all of it was well constructed. And we eventually in the 2009 got a new water system. We're taken in by, we now have Lake Michigan water. But again, the water system of itself was just really a ton of work.
Question, yeah, if we ask you a question and you can say yay or nay, perhaps that would help the conversation. One, who did the piping in the first place to bring the water from where?
The co-op.
We
The
had-
people,
Well, where does the water come from originally?
our well.
We had
Well.
two wells.
Okay.
There was a major well
Mhm.
and then there was a second well.
Okay,
And so,
and who did the digging?
well, they hired people
Okay,
to come in and do that,
Mhm.
the initial part. And
Just a second, Verna, and the rest of the common area, what became of the rest of the common property when the co-op was
And most
dissolved?
of that common area was considered undevelopable. And so we had to sell it or try to sell it. And, so the North Shelter Belt, a significant piece of which the pump house, our water pump house was in front of it. That was eventually purchased by current members. But so this all happened about the time of the crash in 2008. And as I recall, they were each put up for their 120, I think they were each put up for 225,000. The lot that now has a house on it was sold for 90,000. And my next door neighbor that lived across from the other lot, bought 3 acres for $18,000. The park was given to our park district, the York Center Park District, which is a separate entity. It's a community park district. The South Shelter Belt.
What is a shelter belt?
Well, what they did is they took the property going around the co-op and planted trees there. So it just created a space between us, and on one side was Montini High School, and on the other side was developing into commercial. So it was just to protect.
There were strips of land
Yeah.
surrounding
A buffer zone.
A buffer.
Yeah.
Right, because it planted many trees on it.
And
And
had a park and
Right.
freshening the air and improving the scenery and improving the quality of the property.
and privacy.
Yeah.
And in the co-op, one wasn't allowed to have fences, so there were lots of trees, and there was a landscape plan about what to plant and where. And so, again, it was real important for many different reasons.
Did you have monthly meetings to agree on such things?
There was monthly board meetings and periodic community meetings. And the community meetings, to me, were one of the best things because it was town hall government. And I thought Joyce was a wonderful president, but it was a really tough time. It was they're a tough group to corral or not corral. And some people hated the meetings. But it was, everybody had an opinion and often gave it.
Yeah, we're a congregational church. We know about that. Let's spread the wealth around. Yes, Peggy, you had a question?
Yeah, what's the general acreage we're talking about? Or the date
They
that you started?
Close to it. Well, they added parts. The part we live in and you live in was purchased later. And so there were added sections that came to it. It's probably about 100 acres.
It was
100 acres now or
No.
when it started?
When it, not when it started.
Yeah, okay.
It might have been around 50 when it started.
It was 102 acres when we lived there. And now,
It isn't any.
well, it isn't any, the area is still basically the same if you take out the parks and again, the shelter belts were, the South Shelter Belt was deeded to the people who lived there. The South Shelter Belt was deeded to people who lived there if they chose to take it. And part of the park was given to one of the people who was one of the dissolution.
Anybody on Zoom want to offer a comment or question? Okay, very good. Got about 5 minutes. Any case?
I have a question about membership. So, I know you said when the applications came in, they were stamped by date. Was it decided solely upon like the chronology of the application or say, for example, like, it mentioned that some of the originators were all Caucasian, so you realized that certain groups were underrepresented. Would those groups, would those applications rise to the top, or how did it work?
So you have to remember, this is the 40s.
Yeah,
And my daughter-in-law is a real estate attorney in Finsdale, cleaned up a lot of deeds that had restrictions on them. So, so yes, they were stamped. But it would, just because Nancy Nishimura was Japanese American, didn't raise her up to the top. But I want to give a perspective from Cherokee's point of view. That the story I heard about the founding is there was the core group of the Church of the Brethren, but there were conscientious objectors of World War II who were working in hospitals and places around the US. And there were people who were way involved in socialism in the 30s and lived in co-ops in Hyde Park, Chicago. And so that group that went from a small group from New York Center, from the Church of the Brethren, expanded to a list of 30. And what happened was there was connections between all these different groups where somebody knew someone who knew someone. And so really the flavor of the 30s and working together on socialism influenced that initial group of 30 people who committed money, not only their name, but money to that. So that's where we got the diversity. So there was quite a diversity among those original groups. So yeah, so it was your date of application that decided your priority in purchasing a place. And when we joined, and after that, there would be, you would apply and fill the form. You would have a meeting. The co-op folks would come to your home once, twice, maybe, invite you to a membership meeting and talk about it. And I understood it more as a process of us talking about who we were. So rarely did we deny anyone membership. People who heard us talk 3 times knew whether they wanted to be part of this community and not have a deed for their property. And so they removed themselves. And so
we're right at time. Joyce has just said something that's very important that we'll pick up next week. Not have a deed to your property. Keep that in mind, because that does come into play, I think. Is it fair to say?
Clearly.
In a very big way in what happens next in the co-op. I want to thank Doris Dornberger, Joyce Capital.
that was part of the film, was just the first generation. So I would see myself in the second generation of co-op people.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
You're right, and I'm probably more 3rd generation.
Yeah, and our neighbor Nancy Nishimura is still there, our neighbor, and I believe she's the last remaining original person in the co-op.
Wait, what about, Walter? The Stephen purchase.
No, because we're in that
How
west
old,
area.
how old is she?
So Nancy's in her 90s for sure.
95 or 96.
Right.
And
Oh,
she
and
was-
Carwin Walton, who was in here,
Yeah.
had her 96th birthday this week.
And
She doesn't live there.
Nancy was interred during the war. A Japanese American was interred during World War II.
And her husband ran a huge drugstore in the city.
But we live in that western part of the community that was not the initial part of the community. So our home was built in 55. Nancy's was around that time.
But ours was 54.
Right. Others were built in the 40s. Ours were built in the 50s because we were a little bit later. I speak like I was there. I wasn't born.
Mine was built in 65, my next door neighbor was 75. One next door and one across the street, one of them was 75 and one was 77.